Hi guys, it's Kylie, and I'm back with some more Christian symbolism. Not in anime this time, at least not the Japanese variety. Today we're going to talk about Disney's original, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I rewatched the 1937 animated film recently due to a sudden nostalgia kick, and I discovered some things I'd overlooked as a kid. First of all, just look at this animation for a second. It's so detailed, so fluid, it's an absolute artistic feat. Just thinking about hand-drawing these water scenes without the help of computers gives me a migraine. These animators created nothing short of a masterpiece. And to make it even better, this movie is absolutely smothered in Christianity. I'd go so far as to say the entire story is a Christian allegory. So let's talk Christianity in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, plus a rant. Yay! Our story centers on, you guessed it, Snow White, a girl who is defined by her innocence and purity, reminiscent of Eve in the Garden of Eden. Throughout this story, we'll see that Snow White ultimately represents God's church, or his faithful followers. We first meet Snow White as she draws water from a well, a setting where several women in the Bible had divine encounters and spiritual experiences. From Hagar meeting an angel at a well, to Rebecca, Rachel, and Zipporah meeting their chosen husbands at wells, to maybe the most notable example, the Samaritan woman who met Jesus himself at Jacob's well. Snow sings a plea into her well. I'm wishing for the one I love to find me today. This wish is a prayer to escape her abusive situation and to find true love, something she was severely lacking in her life. And of course, her prince finds her as a direct answer to this prayer. No, he didn't stalk her, as Rachel Zegler suggested. He literally came at Snow's request. And who's really doing the stalking here? Weird. But who is this unnamed prince? I see the prince as the Christ figure of this story. He arrives on a white horse, which might be a nod to Revelation 19:11-16, when Christ rides in on a white horse. Jesus Christ is of course known as the Prince of Peace. He joins Snow's song at the well, and they fall in love. But the Queen, our Satan figure, is threatened by Snow's innocence, and orders her death. As a result, Snow is expelled from the safety of the castle into the dangerous wilderness. This mirrors Eve's expulsion from Eden into the harsh, desolate world where she faces trials and opposition. As we know, the Queen's initial plot fails, and Snow adapts to her new reality with the Seven Dwarfs. 7 is one of the most significant numbers in the Bible. God created the world in a 7-day period, forever marking 7 as the number for completion or perfection. These dwarves, however, are anything but perfect. With the exception of Doc, each of them is named with an adjective that describes their personality. Sleepy, bashful, dopey, grumpy, etc. They seem to represent different aspects of humanity, or the human experience. Snow finds refuge with these kind but imperfect men in the forest. This calls to mind Revelation 12:6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days, or a symbolic period of time. In this verse, the woman who fled into the wilderness is usually interpreted as the church, or God's people, another sign that Snow White represents all faithful followers of God. Like the church, Snow has found safety and nourishment while she nourishes others, but she knows hiding in the forest is not her ultimate destiny. She sings her famous song, "Someday My Prince Will Come." This is not purely a romantic ballad. It's also a song about waiting for God's deliverance. Meanwhile, the Queen persists in her plot. She uses dark magic to conceal her identity and tempts Snow with an apple. Biblical symbolism doesn't get any more obvious than this. Snow takes a bite and falls into a death-like coma, just as Eve was warned of death for partaking of the forbidden fruit. But while the dwarves mourn her apparent death, the prince returns a second time, reminding us of Christ's promised second coming. Through true love's kiss, or genuine love, he alone could rescue Snow from the apple's curse. He resurrects her and redeems her from the fall. In the final scene, the prince carries Snow to his glowy, ethereal kingdom in the clouds. The prince, or the biblical bridegroom, carries his resurrected bride, the biblical church, to heaven. Snow White is all of us. experiencing hardships, making the best of it, being nourished by God, serving others, falling for temptations, and patiently waiting for our prince to return. This is the genius of the original film. It can be viewed as a beautiful love story and nothing more, and that's great. It's simple enough for a child to appreciate, but it's also a profound allegory for humanity's spiritual journey and Christian redemption. Arrogant modern writers, imagining themselves enlightened, think they can improve upon timeless classics, but in the process, they're proving they never really understood them in the first place. And this is where I want to shift to another point that today's writers seem determined to misunderstand. In virtually every recent remake of a classic, there's a recurring theme, a rejection of femininity. Hollywood, in all its shallowness, attempts to portray strength by handing a girl a sword, dressing her in armor, and giving her a self-indulgent monologue, but that doesn't make her strong. It makes her a loud cosplayer. The truth is, Snow White was already strong. She didn't allow abuse to steal her gentleness, purity, or her dreams. She was so kind that her example moved the huntsman to defy the evil queen. She rescued 7 men whose lives were in shambles, organizing their chaos with feminine grace. She made their house into a home. Despite all the darkness she'd experienced, she still saw the good in people, leaving her vulnerable to the poison apple, but proving her courage. She didn't allow her circumstances to make her cynical. She impacted every life around her for the better. The queen was her foil, the dark feminine archetype, power-hungry, self-centered, vain, driven by envy. Snow was the opposite, soft, selfless, diligent, unshakably hopeful. That is strength. We never lacked strong female characters. We've overlooked them. We undervalue feminine traits. Too many equate a woman's worth with how well she can display masculinity, or worse, how well she can mimic the evil queen. But true strength isn't just muscle or dominance. And needing help from others does not indicate weakness. But you'd never know that going by this new generation of princesses, all parroting the same idea for the past decade.
I guess the main difference is the relationship with the prince, that she's not waiting for a prince to save her.
The biggest thing about watching Belle for the first time compared to other Disney heroines was that she wasn't waiting to be saved. There was no saving to be done. It was the first kind of feminist of the Disney princesses. She was kind of a departure from these young women who were waiting to be saved.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love.
If we take Hollywood's toxic messaging to heart, then if a woman needs help from a man ever, she must be weak. Is that an empowering message? By their logic, if you're trapped in a burning building, don't you dare call 911. In fact, you'd better save everyone else in the building as well, because it all rests on your strong female shoulders alone. You've got this, boss babe. Okay, maybe I'm taking things to an extreme here, but can you blame me? Virtually every recently released film and remake has erased much, if not all, reliance on men. In some cases, the male counterpart barely plays a role at all.
It's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby.
It certainly seems radical independence is the message Disney is sending to young girls. At the same time, modern therapists constantly tell us that accepting help from others is a strength, and radical independence is actually a trauma response. So many mixed messages to women, and this unhealthy messaging toward women is sending a secondary, maybe more harmful message to young men. That they're unnecessary.
So there's this clip going viral online of a dozen women being asked the following question: do we need men? Most answered very quickly, no. And only one said she thought women needed a man in their lives, only one. But when men were asked a similar question, do we need women, most of them said yes. So why do you think that is?
Because men are useless.
I don't see that mindset causing any problems at all. Of course, it's not just the remakes either. Disney, which was once famous for its iconic love stories, hasn't produced an original romance since Tangled in 2010. For the past 15 years, most Disney films have focused on female protagonists without any romantic narratives whatsoever, except for the occasional romantic subplot. And the contribution of any male characters to the plot is extremely limited. And it's not just Disney or Hollywood, it's all forms of media. I dare you to find a single mainstream young adult novel published in the past decade that features a male protagonist. I mean, look at this fancy graph that was totally not made by ChatGPT. This reflects the number of female versus male main characters in young adult fiction throughout the years. As you can see, this overrepresentation of girl protagonists wasn't always the norm. It was nearly perfectly balanced in the early 2000s. The industry claims this shift is due to the fact that girls read more than boys, creating more demand for books that relate to girls. But was that always the case? Is this one of those chicken-egg conundrums? Perhaps boys read less now because they don't feel books are representing their interests and identities, which leads me to wonder, are we gatekeeping boys from reading of all things? Now, I am not in favor of representation for representation's sake. That turns art into mere propaganda, and that's not cool. I would never advocate for adding more male characters just to fulfill some sort of quota, because I'm a firm believer that art has to come from the heart, not societal pressure. So if this massive shift toward favoring female characters is completely organic, then that's fine, albeit a little weird. Creatives can write whatever female empowerment art they want. Who am I to stand in the way of their creative spirit? The problem is, this change doesn't appear to be organic. Of course, this could simply be the result of trends. You have best-selling books like Twilight and The Hunger Games, and everyone wants to copy them, either consciously or unconsciously. That certainly plays a role, but I think it's more than that. I'm gonna risk sharing an anecdotal example. I have a successful author acquaintance who recently approached some publishers about a manuscript he'd written. It was a children's book starring a young boy. His publisher replied that they loved the story, but they could only publish it if he gender-swapped the protagonist to a girl. Their reasoning was that the market supposedly favors female characters, so they typically didn't even consider works with male leads. This author didn't feel comfortable gender-swapping his character solely for sellability, especially because the story was largely inspired by his real-life experiences as a boy. So thankfully he did not cave under pressure, and he went another route to tell his story. But the point of sharing his experience is that for whatever reason, fiction markets seem convinced that girls are their target audience. This seems odd to me, considering countless highly successful young adult novels featuring boys were released in my youth, including the best-selling young adult series of all time, a little story called Harry Potter, which was read and beloved by virtually every millennial, girl and boy alike. But barring going back to reading older works, what do boys read today? Where is today's Harry Potter, or Aragon, or Percy Jackson? Maybe this is why so many young men are gravitating toward anime these days, because the East is still producing stories that speak to men, while the West has virtually erased them. But I digress from that manic tangent neither of us saw coming. You know what didn't erase men? Snow White. Did you like that segue? Felt a little forced to me. Anyway, yes, we're still talking about Snow White. Snow White beautifully highlighted the interdependence of men and women. Snow softened the huntsman's heart, uplifted the animals, and tamed the dwarves' home. In turn, Snow received help from them as well. None felt the need to compete, and everyone had unique gifts to share, which were all valued and appreciated. With the exception of the prince, the Christ figure, everyone, men, women, and animals, needed each other. Consistent with the biblical truth, neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord. And what a beautiful message that is. And since we're already ruining stories by psych-evaluating the characters, we've got to talk about this. The original Snow White dealt with her problems in a surprisingly healthy way. She cried when she needed to, acknowledging that her circumstances sucked and it wasn't her fault. But she didn't stay there on the forest floor. She didn't allow herself to become vengeful or a perpetual victim. And as soon as she noticed others in need, namely the scared animals, she pulled herself together and selflessly comforted them. In turn, they brought her to a place of refuge, and she adapted to her circumstances with joy. She accepted help gracefully, without shame or guilt, and she offered help in her own unique way, without bitterness or scorekeeping. She was resilient, kind, secure with herself, and never gave up hope. The world would be a better place if we could all be a little more like Snow White. I'm not suggesting the past was perfect, but can we shed this modern superiority complex that dismisses previous generations as backwards or primitive? Maybe they had valuable wisdom to offer. In fact, maybe, just maybe, they understood some things better than we do. And that's about all the rant I have in me today. Thanks so much for making it to the end. If you're interested in anime that have a surprising amount of Christian themes in them, check out one of these videos. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.